Today I want to talk about Sam Corcos. He's a tech company CEO, he's a minimalist, a digital nomad, and he's also a productivity wizard, which is what I want to talk about today. He started his career as a programmer, he founded multiple companies, and he's now the CEO of Levels, which is a health tech startup. Sam likes to work anywhere, and he values location independence, both for himself and everyone in his company. And he also values deep work. He believes it's easy to get distracted doing busy work instead of doing work that actually moves the company forward.
I think it's a Buddhist saying of something like the problem is not the things that are hard, it's the easy alternative. If there's an easy path to make you feel like you're working, which is catching up on notifications, you feel like you're being productive, but it distracts you from the things that are actually important. That is really for me, that's what I struggle with the most in terms of distraction. It's the things that are easy to check the boxes, but they're actually not that important. It's trying to find systems where I can block off the time to really focus for a long stretch on something that's actually going to move the needle instead of just having myself feel like I'm being productive in some capacity.
Sam also believes that context switching is expensive, and he thinks it's much more expensive than people realize. Basically, we can't multitask.
People really, really underestimate the cost of context switching. I feel bad for people who talk about how they can multitask and how they're able to solve all these problems concurrently. And all of the evidence suggests that people are not capable of multitasking. Having long stretches of deep focused work time is really the only way that work gets done.
As the founder and CEO of the company, and seeing as he was originally an engineer, Sam has to balance his individual contributor work with his CEO responsibilities. I think by nature, Sam would rather have an empty calendar, allowing him to do constant deep work. But he does have smaller tasks, which are commonly done by a manager. So to get around this, he operates a maker-manager split calendar. Paul Graham wrote about the difference between maker and manager schedules in his famous essay. And the basis is that makers need long stretches of uninterrupted time, whereas managers have lots of smaller tasks which don't require getting into a deep focused state. Sam found that it was very difficult to switch between those two modes in a single day. So what he does instead is he batches all of his manager tasks into specific days.
This is actually my first non-technical role. Historically, I've been in software development, usually the person writing code or in engineering leadership. The first time I really took a leadership role in engineering and was doing a lot less programming, the challenge that I ran into I found it very hard to communicate this to people inside the company who were not software developers or not technical, was how if I have a 30-minute meeting at 11 a.m. and at 3 p.m., I can't get any work done the whole day. And they'll say, well, it's only 1 hour. You still have the whole rest of the day to work. And it's just like, it really doesn't work that way when you're trying to get into a flow state. I can't work up the emotional energy to even start working on this project if I know that there's a high likelihood I'll be interrupted in the middle of it. And so the difference between manager and maker time is manager time is it's constant context switching, and it's really not a flow state. It's jumping in between tasks. And maker time is you're deeply focused on one thing. And your writing code is a perfect example of maker time. Anytime you've been in a flow state where you just lose track of time. There have been times when I've been focused on coding and 10, 12 hours go by and I haven't even looked up at the clock. They're both useful and important. And the thing that I discovered about myself is that especially when you're in engineering leadership, where you really have to do both roles. You're still coding, but you also have to manage. I found that intraday context switching was the problem, not interday. And by that I mean jumping from coding to meetings to coding within the same day was what was causing me most of the emotional turmoil. Whereas if I just said meetings are on Mondays and Tuesdays are only programming, I'll take no meetings. Wednesdays, I'll do meetings again and no coding. If I just accepted certain boundaries around it, where I would have maker days and manager days, it ended up working pretty well.
I've talked about how Sam values deep work and setting time aside for it, but having large blocks of time doesn't guarantee deep work. So how does Sam get into the zone and stay there? Well, I was happy to learn that he doesn't find it easy. He tries to remove all distractions to help him.
I would say I eliminate all possible alternatives is the only way that I'm able to get to that zone. Is I block all websites that I find distracting. I make sure that nothing can come up. Like to give you a sense of just how challenging and sensitive my ability to stay in a deep work mentality is. If I have a 9-hour deep work block on my calendar, and I know that around 2:00, somewhere between 12 and 2, an Instacart delivery is going to show up, I have to punt that entire 9-hour block to another day. There's no way I'm going to be able to get any meaningful deep work done. I'm somewhat envious of authors who talk about how they have their 1 or 2 hours of writing every morning. And I wish that I could operate in those kinds of increments. For me, like if a deep work block is not at least 6 contiguous hours with nothing at the end of that, I have a hard time just getting the motivation to even start. So for me, it's really just about adding friction to things that I don't want to do and ensuring that I have just full calendar to be able to focus on it.
He advises against having lots of tasks in progress at various stages of completion. He suggests people get into the habit of single threading and seeing something through to completion. And this is one of the most important things that I've learned from Sam, as it's something I'm very bad at. I tend to have lots of things in progress and push them one step at a time to completion. Here's Sam explaining the benefit of single threading.
Seeing things through to completion is very important, and single threading things to completion instead of making lots of progress on different things but not delivering them. Something that we've seen as an example of this kind of problem within Levels is we have a lot of memos that are fully written. They are like 99% done, but there's like a few comments that haven't been resolved and they haven't been moved to out of draft and shared with the team. And the problem is that creates cognitive load on the person who needs to finish it. But they've already moved on to other projects. And so it's now extra emotionally difficult for them to come back to a thing that they already have some form of closure on, because they've already moved on to the next thing. And now they're coming back to revisit something that they already at least emotionally feel like they've finished. So there's something about focusing on as few things as possible and seeing them through to completion instead of creating new work in progress as we get close to completion on major priorities.
Next, I want to talk about how Sam prioritizes tasks and manages his time. Most people use to-do lists to track tasks they need to accomplish. But Sam has a different approach. He solely uses his calendar.
Yeah, totally. And I've worked with a lot of people on our team, people who are friends of mine through this. And the thing that almost always happens is they have this long to-do list. And I say, all right, here's what I want you to do. Take everything on this to-do list with the dates that you think they'll get done by, which is usually this week or next week. And I want you to just put them on your calendar with the amount of time you think it's going to take. And then we'll have another follow-up call next week and we'll see what happens. And then we have the call. And then they say, this process doesn't work. I say, why is that? So, well, I tried to move it over there, but there isn't enough space in my week to fit all these items. It's like, yes, that's
the point
this
of the
is
exercise.
the point of the exercise, is there literally is not enough time. Your time is finite, and the number of digital items you can add to a to-do list is infinite. You are working with the wrong constraint, which is like the amount of items you can fit in a database row, as opposed to the number of things that you can fit in your finite time of your calendar.
I love this, and I've implemented it myself, and I've found it much easier to schedule my week and have a more realistic understanding of how much I can get done. Something else that's cool about using your calendar is you can easily see where you spent your time, and this tells you what your priorities really are.
I was talking to somebody recently about this, where we did a values exercise, and they came up with a set of values that they have. And then it's a bit of a trick question, because then you say, all right, let's go over your calendar and how you spent your time. And they'll say, oh, my values are friends, family, this, that. And it's like, oh, how'd you spend your time? It's like YouTube, Instagram. It's like, do you notice how none of these things match? Like your actual priorities are consuming news. Your actual priority is doing sports, which is fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But empirically, your priorities are this. How you spend your time are your priorities. And that's a difficult thing for people to understand, but it really is like an epistemological problem where, like, the example would be, if you're an axe murderer, but you go your whole life and you never murder someone with an axe, are you actually an axe murderer? Like, the act is what makes you what you are.
Yeah.
I think this is Ben Horowitz's book. Like, what you do is who you are. Like, that is what it is.
The last thing I want to talk about is getting efficient with your tools. We've spoken about the importance of deep work and having large blocks of uninterrupted time in your calendar. But how can you get the most out of an hour? You need to leverage technology. And this sounds fancy, but it can actually be very simple. Sam explains that mastering and using keyboard shortcuts is one of the best investments you can make.
Hotkeys are probably the lowest hanging fruit for people to improve their productivity for almost no cost.
How do hotkeys differ from keyboard shortcuts in Gmail?
It's the same idea.
Okay.
The thing is, most people just don't take the time to learn it. There's several studies on this that I can share with you, but it's like free productivity. You spend a handful of minutes, 15 minutes, maybe 10 minutes one time learning what hotkeys to use. And most people will see a 10 to 40% increase in productivity immediately for the rest of their lives. And yet, most people don't take the time to learn them. Like, it is, if you are not using hotkeys to process your email, if you're in Figma, learn the hotkeys. If you're in Photoshop, learn the hotkeys. It is a free productivity boost for almost no cost.
And another tip, especially for email and messaging, is to use email snippets, which allows you to reuse repeated phrases or sentences.
Yeah, anybody who's worked in customer support knows a lot about snippets. A snippet is a common phrase or language that you use in many, many communications. I think right now, within levels, I think something like 70% of our communications, we already have an answer written for it, which is pretty high. And I know that for a lot of the emails that I process, I would guess maybe half of the emails are largely written as a snippet, because a lot of the communications that you do are generally consistent. Like, I have a snippet for grabbing a time on my calendar, which uses Calendly to schedule something, and that works super well. I schedule a lot of things, so it's useful to have a snippet instead of typing it out every time. Oftentimes, you can compose emails from multiple snippets. I have some snippets that are basically a list of investor asks. I ask a lot of things from our investors. I think that snippet is maybe 20 items long, and I keep it up to date. And as I go through the process of asking for things from our investors, I'll paste the whole snippet and then I'll cut out all the ones that we don't need.
Thanks for listening to this guide to productivity, which I compiled from listening to Sam Corcos. If you want to learn more, I recommend you listen to his long interview on the Tim Ferriss Show. He also has a company podcast, his company Levels, which Sam regularly appears on. He's very transparent about how the company operates and how he works personally. Bye for now. Catch you next time.